All right,
I
everybody,
can't believe
welcome.
my opening shot was me drinking water.
That's okay. We're just going to roll with it. All
All right.
right, everybody, welcome to episode 91 of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. I'm so glad to be back with you. My name is Ellen Finnigan. I will be your host, and we are here with Father McCarthy today. Hello, Father. Welcome.
Mhm.
Hello, sir.
Father McCarthy is he's a priest and a teacher of gospel nonviolence for over 55 years. And he's been on this channel multiple times before, so you're probably pretty familiar with him. We also have Patrick Thompson. Patrick is my co-host today. And I met Patrick back in November when he was in the Behold the Lamb retreat that we hosted. He was a student, so I guess he is also a student of Father McCarthy's. But Patrick, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you hope to talk about today.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for having me on, for allowing me. I know after the Behold the Lamb conference, I reached out to you because I was interested. I thought, hey, maybe we could talk about this. I'd love to talk to Father McCarthy sometime. Um, I'll give you a brief rundown so we can just get into the meat of everything. How I first found out about Father McCarthy was so for many years I had kind of a significant conflict within myself of, let's just say, certain political and worldviews that did not line up with the teachings of Jesus Christ. But I found these worldviews so compelling, and that they just felt like they were a part of me. Like it's like, Patrick, you can't deny you feel this way, so why even try? You know what I mean? They would not line up with Jesus Christ. And at one point, oftentimes, I absolutely knew, I felt 100% right about what I was thinking. And so did the person on the opposite end of the spectrum. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was contributing to the problem by pursuing these political, social things like that. And I will say, because I won't mention details of politics, not so much that I'm afraid, but because it's like human nature. The moment you mention them, it's divisive, and you know what I mean? Like so, but I will just say that I do believe there are a lot of guys and women on all ends of the spectrum that are in the same position I was in, that inside are in conflict because they know that something isn't right, but they can't shake that they feel so strongly about their politics, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I actually accidentally, on a whim, discovered Father McCarthy on a podcast. It was not yours, Ellen. It was on a different one. And it was not the type of podcast you'd expect to find a priest talking on, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And so it was very compelling to hear him, to not only that, but he was speaking about the nonviolent love of Jesus Christ. Now, I've always been a kind of a tender-hearted guy, that sort of thing. The youngest of four brothers, and I was always, my mom and I are super close, and I love animals, and I've got this soft heart, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I was always, the military was one thing. It was, violence in movies is fine, all these things. And so I didn't think too hard about violence, though, and the double standards. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. I'll try to
No, keep going, keep
No,
going.
I'm
Yeah.
interested. Yeah, keep going.
All right, all right, all right. So I heard Father McCarthy speaking, and I was desperate. Do you know what I mean? Like, these are the type of things I would talk to my wife about it, and I would, what do I do? Like, I'm praying about this. And especially at the political climate at the time, we're talking like height of George Floyd stuff, and things like that, like unrest, civil unrest, things like that, statues being torn down left and and so Father McCarthy, I heard, and the message transcended it all. It felt like this is that third option. It's not just, be in denial about your politics or embrace them and just go all in, you know what I mean? And like, so there's this transcendent third option that was suddenly presented, and I knew Jesus was always there. I was raised religious without being very devout, that sort of thing. And
Were you raised Catholic, Patrick?
no, sir, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to call you sir.
Charlie.
No, sir. No, Charlie. I was raised in the Lutheran church.
Okay, good.
Yeah. My mother is the more
All right.
religious of the family. And so I heard Father McCarthy, and I was like, wow, this is very interesting. This is compelling. And it seemed like a little light in that kind of darkness. So I went to the website, and I saw all these resources for free, which to me is impressive when I see free resources.
You hear that,
uh,
Ellen? Free resources,
I
I
knew you
will-
were going to say that. I knew you were gonna say that.
non-monetized.
Hey,
It
okay,
was-
yeah, we'll get back to
and
it.
I saw, and then I saw, okay, I won't get too much into it because it sounds judgmental, but I saw books, right? And I was like, okay, this is kind of what it's about. You got to buy the book, that sort of thing. The books were free. You have them for free, PDF. And I was like, whoa, like, okay, this, like, you kept getting more legitimized in my head. I was like, okay, this guy seems like the real deal. Because oftentimes, too, you get past the first threshold and you're like, oh, that's what it's about. They're for this political candidate. Oh, that's what this is about. They're selling this program that, and that's maybe throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but still, it was very impressive to me that all this stuff was free. And but I did end up purchasing a copy anyway. I was like, I want to read All Things Flee Thee, for Thou Fleest Me. And I purchased that book. I read it through, and I was highlighting and underlining. And it also, I was so happy you included this, Charlie. I probably should have had it with me right here, but there's a paragraph in there. It's like a brief explanation of why we should believe Jesus Christ. And it was essentially, it boiled down to Jesus. We should believe Jesus's words because he is who he says he is, and we know he is who he says he is, because it's in the Gospels. And in a way, I can understand someone seeing that and being like, well, that's not intellectually satisfying enough for me. That's like this. But to me, I'm like, it doesn't get any better than that, though. Like, there's this element of faith where it's like, logic carries you so far. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. I have a habit of going off and things. So, Ellen, I need you to crack that whip when I get off course, please. But so I listened to Behold the Lamb, the whole thing. I started looking up YouTube videos. I was shocked that there were not more views of your stuff. I couldn't believe that you did not have more popularity. Same with you, Ellen. The Cam podcast. I'm like, how is this not, like, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like, it's just strange to me. So, but in a way that made it all the more fascinating and compelling to me to like pursue this more. So All Things Fleest, and then
You're saying that when they hide us on the algorithms, it works in our favor.
that's what I can't figure out. Because I will say this, Ellen, I've even noticed when trying to look up Catholics Against Militarism in the podcast, I can't find it. Only it's because I'm subscribed that I can find it.
Yeah,
And
no
weird.
joke. Like, I think I've been blacklisted for a long time. Just as a quick diversion, like, I used to like Google myself sometimes just to see like
Yeah.
what's out there. And I would always come up. There's a website that I've written for since 2008. And
Yeah.
I've written tons of articles, none of them come up. And also the Cam podcast used to come up, but as of like a year or two ago, it doesn't even pop up when you Google my name.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something going on.
Yeah, it's strange. I just last week I tried searching for it again from my ride home. I couldn't find it. It was only because I was subscribed to it that I pulled it up.
There was one thing, oh, this is kind of funny. When
No,
you
please.
used to Google, if you Googled Catholics against, that you know how Google would recommend something? It was like
Yeah.
Catholics against seedless watermelons or something is the thing that would pop up before my website, which has been out there since 2013. And I was like, oh,
Okay.
well, sure, Google,
Okay.
that must be what people are looking for. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. So God knows, literally, So, and then I listened to all of Cam. Anytime it was Father McCarthy, I was listening to those episodes. And I would take road trips to Illinois to see my parents, and I was just listening to Catholics Against Militarism. And then I started corresponding with someone named Chidi, right?
Good man. Good man.
And they recommended Father David M. Knight's book, so I read that, No Power But Love. So anyway, I became steeped in this, and then I took Ellen's class, loved it, and Ellen and we have a great affinity, a mutual love for the Iliad, which was awesome. Yeah. And so it's just been a nice, a nice how it's all fallen into place. But I would be lying if I said I still didn't have, unrest at times spiritually, things like that. And So it's really nice to be able to talk on this podcast, but specifically this podcast, I've been reading Epictetus for years. And next to the Bible and next to Jesus Christ, Epictetus is like next in line. That sounds bad, I suppose, but
And who is that? Can you explain for our listeners?
Yeah, okay. Epictetus is an ancient Greek philosopher. He was alive when Christianity was just kind of blooming. Like he died in 76 AD, something like that. But he was a Stoic philosopher, and I've read his book, The Discourses of Epictetus, probably like 6 times, and he's very much in line with like Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, and then Seneca, Letters from a Stoic. So it's very reason based to Epic. So I don't consider myself a Stoic. The disclaimer, I'm a layman completely. But I've read a lot and I've implemented a lot of it in my life, and I've seen a lot of the fruits, as far as like reason, being calm, and seeing things with using more logic and things like that. And I found that it's an amazing supplement. It can be, I think, a wonderful supplement to Christian precepts and things like that, where it's like, and it kind of clicked with me because Father McCarthy had said, the role of reason, I believe, and Ellen, you reiterated this in an email, is to show us how to implement the some of the Christian precepts and things like that, the teachings of Jesus, like how logically they work. I think it was something like that. Is that right, Father McCarthy?
How to implement the teachings of Jesus, not how to abolish them or minimize them or dismiss them or cancel them out.
Yes, absolutely. I have found, and Stoicism has become more popular these days. I don't know how long it'll last in that sense, but for me, it's helped a lot in my life, and just about understanding what's truly your own, what's not yours, what is subject to just being ripped away in a moment by fate or God, those sorts of things. However, I think that one of the risks for me, and that is a risk, is that it surpasses Jesus Christ if you're not careful, if you start to idolize it and things like that. And so I wanted to bring a couple of things that to me contradict or diverge from Christ, and just get Father McCarthy's perspective, because I remembered Father McCarthy had mentioned Epictetus in one of his episodes, and just to hear that name, my ears perked up, because you don't hear his name very often. You might hear about Socrates or just Stoicism in general. So I'm just curious, first, Father McCarthy, I'm assuming you have a lot of experience with, obviously, philosophy and things like that, but Epictetus specifically, and like the discourses, have you like spent a lot of time reading that, and what was your reaction to it?
Well, first of all, Epictetus, of course, was a slave.
Mm.
At the same time, another Stoic, Tiberius Caesar, was the king, the Caesar of the time Epictetus lived. And both of them espoused Stoicism was theirs, it was in their blood, was their way of thinking. And I've actually given away, as Christmas presents, large numbers of books of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And I even have one up here which I can't find right now on my computer. Yeah. That's when you are lying in bed in the morning with the covers over you to keep out the cold. Is this what God made you for?
Yes. I love it. I love that.
So I really, yeah, and the same is true with Zeno and Seneca and so forth and so on. Seneca, interestingly enough, was born the same year as Jesus, 4 BC. And
Yeah, if
but
you don't mind me interjecting, I'm sorry. There was a loose, and I think it's been disproven, but there was that rumor that Seneca was a closet Christian, and like maybe even it corresponded, I think, with Paul at one time. There was a theory out there for a little bit. That was very interesting to hear that, but I think it's been disproved.
well, that gets us to the a more uh, universal issue, which is Stoicism has was the most attractive and most believed philosophy in the Roman Empire. It was in the air like capitalism is here.
Yeah.
It had its profound people like Marcus Aurelius and Zeno and Seneca, but it also had the average person in the street that could make sense out of it and use it and adhere to it a little bit, and therefore it really became it was the major thought process, philosophical thought process, philosophy in the consciousness of the Roman people at the time that you're talking about here, which is basically the before and during Christianity's beginnings.
Yeah.
So that being the case, it's almost impossible, as I understand it from biblical scholars and historians, it's almost impossible for Paul not to have come in contact with Stoicism. Not that he accepted it, not that even that he studied it, but it was in the air. You couldn't avoid it. It was just the language, the metaphors, the phraseology. It was there, and as was pointed out by I think Peter Berger a long time ago, 1966, that first one to do it, I believe, was language is a construct of society. When you come into the language, you don't make it, and therefore, if the society is using the word whatever logos or something, yeah, that's how you're going to interpret what you've got to bring to it. Anyway, so Paul obviously it's self-evident he came in contact with Stoicism.
Yeah.
Indeed, some of his sentences are word for word from Stoic consciousness, such as live and move and have your being, in which you live and move and have your being. That doesn't mean the same phrases didn't exist in Judaism. So I'm glad you gave us what you gave us on your kind of introduction to why we're here for yourself, because the question the question when the question is asked, what is the relationship between Christianity and Stoicism?
Yes.
The first thing that has to be considered is what do we mean by each of the terms? Stoicism and Christianity. Otherwise, they're so broad and with such a multiple of meanings, we go all over the place, arguments or whatever the case may be. So what I'm talking about when I talk about Christianity, fundamentally, is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus.
Got it.
It's as close as we can get, huh?
Yeah.
I recognize that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the script of an original oral tradition. But that's fine. They are the script, and that's what, obviously, the original oral tradition had to be very, very close to them to be the script, okay? And that, because once you pass that, and I mean even Paul, once you pass that, you are dealing with people who are writing, who are in the atmosphere of Stoicism. All the fathers of the church, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
This is Tertullian, whatever the case may be. This is where they live. And so, as far as I'm concerned, we're talking about the Gospels as Christianity. What is also true, Patrick, and what you obviously come to see, is that a great deal of post-Jesus Christianity, I mean, a great deal, and the longer you go on in Christianity, the more it gets, is inundated with Stoicism. In fact, I had a bishop say to a student of mine who was pressing him on the nonviolence in the just war theory being inconsistent with it, and who made the point that the just war theory was the fruit of Stoicism. I had a bishop say to him, an active bishop right now, say to him, of course it is. Most of Christian morality is Stoicism. Meaning the Christian morality after Jesus. And so the question is, how is Stoicism defined, in order to figure out how that definition of Stoicism fits into Christianity, meaning the Christianity post-Gospels, post-Jesus, because there is not a jot of Stoicism in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is Jewish culture. All those words in there, the law and so forth and so on, refer to the Torah, not the natural law.
Right.
And of course, Jesus never got outside of outside of the Jewish community, which is, of course, what it would be. But be that as it may, it really becomes important to first of all make the distinction between Christianity, it's gospel Christianity, and what follows into the future, and because without doing that, in terms of Stoicism, we can't see how Stoicism affected Christianity, altered Christianity, modified Christianity, and we just don't. We just have no basis of integrating or coming to grips with the issue.
That's very interesting. I'd never considered that. That with the four Gospels being, separate, because the epistles, things like that, and the church fathers being post, the ground zero of it all, and then having that influence of, like it's like the air around you is Stoicism, like you said, because it was like the more or less religion of, the time.
It was. They call it philosophy, but it served the purpose of religion. It was the way existence was understood and lived and thought through, and people found peace in it.
I'd never considered that. That's very interesting to hear. Because what's interesting too is I've found, like in Epictetus specifically, because I realize there's so much about Stoicism I don't know. What I do know a decent amount of is the discourses and what's in those, and because I've read just a lot of Epictetus. Okay. So, but like it's very interesting because there is a reading in the discourses, you can find support for things like definitely like turning the other cheek, non-violent protest, and I wrote the other one down. Oh, love of enemies, even. Well, with Epictetus, there are no enemies, ideally, that sort of thing. You get to such a place where, now here's the thing though, two things about those is there is that gap where suddenly it seems there's those ideas, but then there's also suddenly like, I hope I'm not doing them a disservice here because maybe I'm confusing things, but it does seem like there is an exception in a way, perhaps for military, defending, there's like suddenly
no gap. Exception. That's part of the philosophy. Yep.
And that was the interesting thing, because you say that the Stoicism influenced, the post-Christ, and that's also in Just War.
Right. That's Just War also. Yeah. Yep.
So that's very interesting because I've noticed that too. Like, because Socrates fought, in a war, and supposedly fought gallantly and all this stuff. But then it's like, so you have this core of where, according to Epictetus, the ideal is, no evil can happen to you. It's all based on your own choice.
Right.
Which in a way is, to me, that has helped me a lot to consider it that way as far as how I conduct myself and things. but then there's suddenly that, but then how do we get from there if there's no evil to suddenly you're
To,
killing people
right.
on a battlefield? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, but that is interesting.
And by the way, 10 Roman emperors who were explicitly Stoic were violent persecutors of Christianity.
I only know of, well,
All of them
probably,
dealt in war and killing and so forth.
yeah.
So, so this is just one point of it.
Yeah.
But when you look, maybe this will be helpful, Patrick. When you look closer at the philosophy of Stoicism, where it comes from,
Yeah.
what is its primary reality that it's dealing with, and gives people to live by, and to try to live peacefully by. And when you look at that, after all the individual meditations and everything else, Stoicism, like, is a philosophy, first of all. It's a philosophy is bringing reason to trying to understand nature, what it is, where it is, my place in it, etc. So it's the use of reason applied to the perception of nature.
Correct.
That being the case, it is always, all philosophy is always a perception of unreality, because my perception of nature is tied to the five senses.
Right.
And the five senses give us not nature, but what emanates from nature that affects these senses.
And all that's different with each person.
All that's subjective with each person. Human perspective, Patrick, is unique every second of a person's life.
Correct.
You and I are unique right now and since the cradle. That is, there never has been, there never will be, and there never can be anyone like us. Why? Because me, Charlie, and Patrick,
Yeah.
from the moment we come into existence, we are perceiving and experiencing nature as we experience in the cradle. You didn't have my experience in the cradle. I didn't have your, not even close, not even, it's utterly different. And so it goes through grammar school, high school, on and on to this very moment. Our experience of reality is unique, but our psyches are made up by what comes in through the five senses. And what has come into my five senses over 83 years is different from what has come into your five senses. And the mind has put it together different ways. So that I perceive existence uniquely. I am unique. I perceive existence uniquely. Why? Because I am an object also, and no two objects can be in the same place at the same time, and therefore no two objects can have the same perception. And I perceive existence uniquely, and I put it together in my mind in a way, for me, the way that no one else ever has. I am unique. So when Thomas Merton says in his Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, it's the diabolical in people that want others to be like themselves. This is what he's talking about. That fellow there is unique. I don't have any right to make him into me. Now, if he chooses to be like me, that's one thing. But for me to make my world, to make other people like me, that's the diabolical. Meaning that is not what existence can be about. All right. So Stoicism in its root is perception, reasonably perception being interpreted by reason.
Reason, yes.
By reason.
Yes.
Reason is everything.
Right.
Now, as you know, we all know clearly, two people can have two different perceptions of the same thing, reasonably understand each of them, and yet they come out differently. So, for example, the famous studies of people who have seen automobile accidents, et cetera.
Yes, yes.
It's not even like they're in the same place at the same time.
And do you know, I'm sorry, real quick, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
that is an interesting thing because that's what I remember Epictetus stressing, which is all of us can agree that justice is good. All of us can agree that, and these virtues that they're good. All of us agree that certain things are bad. Particular cases is where we all
Always.
do you know what I mean? And he
Yep.
would say our task is to work on that piece, that I suppose the reasoning faculty, that so that you have the, I suppose, the perspective of nature, that he would say nature, you know what I mean? That universal nature. And now, as far as I know, nowhere in there does it get to anything sort of like tangible or crossing that finish line where, hey, we found it. It's just about the pursuit of that, the investigation. Right. It's kind of like when you read Socrates, it seems like it always boils down to, you know what I mean? Like you just question, and then it always boils down to a question mark. Like, I don't know, but that's the fascinating thing. So maybe that's the dead end of just using reason. I don't know.
Any thinking human being knows that we're born into a question mark, we live in a question mark, and we die in a question mark. The details are infinitely beyond us, infinitely. Right. But there's something more here with Stoicism. I agree with Epictetus, by the way. That is, that is what has to be done. And by the way, because Christians are human beings too, they also only have a unique perception.
Right.
And so even the basic Christian Jesus commandment, love one another as I have loved you, that has to be applied uniquely by the individual, his unique reality as it's come to him and as he understands it, and so forth and so on. Now, he has to apply reasonably. That's what he has to do, apply it reasonably.
Right.
And so the Christians are exempt from this. But here's the difference. Here's the difference. Stoicism says that by reason, and then by my own choice, I can be a virtuous person.
Mm-hmm.
I can be a virtuous person. And when I become a virtuous person in the various areas, when I am a virtuous man, in other words, not just one virtue, but when I am a virtuous man, therein lies peace and happiness. Therein lies what I was made for.
Yes.
Therein lies contentment, period.
Correct.
All right. Christianity doesn't say that. That is an ethic of self-sufficiency. I am going to do it by the faculties I have, reason and will. I am going to become a virtuous person, or I should become. I should want to become. Christianity is very, very clear. Auto salvation is impossible. You can't become virtuous on your own. There is a need for a savior, whatever that might mean.
Right.
If you remember, I used to use this, I do use it sometimes here and there. Seinfeld show?
Oh yeah.
Comedy, yeah. Okay, they had an episode on there I thought I used to kind of illuminate this. And the episode was that George and Elaine and Kramer and Jerry got to talking about sex and masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
and then they had a bet, $50.
Yes.
They put the $200 in the cup and said, whoever lasts longest without masturbating gets the $200.
Yeah.
And gradually the story goes on, and one falls by the wayside, the other falls by the wayside, the other falls by the wayside, and George wins.
Mm-hmm.
And over the next several episodes, indeed, I think a season, he keeps referring to himself as master of my domain. I'm master
Yes.
of my domain. That was the word. And then in the final episode, when the plane is going down,
Yes.
George says, I lied.
I cheated on the bet. Yeah.
Well, that's an example of the insufficiency of the human mind and will to produce a virtuous person. We need help. We are loaded with it because of our nurturing from a unregenerated society to begin with, that's giving us all these cues about things, whether it be sex or money or lying, who name. We are born and brought up in an unregenerated social order, a social order that's rampant with evil, and that spreads that on to the child as soon as the child is born, and continues.
Hello, listeners. The interview got cut off here because my free 30 minutes of Zoom ran out. But thanks to donations from Janine, Nancy, Paul, Patrick, Brian, and Arthur, I was able to purchase a year-long subscription of Zoom. And so my future interviews won't be cut off every 30 minutes with these awkward pauses. So thank you so much again, Janine, Nancy, Paul, Patrick, Brian, and Arthur. I really appreciate you sending me donations back in January when I did my annual appeal. I'm so grateful to you. And for those of you who are not able to contribute to the podcast financially, remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, all you have to do is hit like or subscribe, and that will help the algorithm. And it's a totally free way of helping these interviews and these videos on the CAM podcast reach more people. If you would like to donate financially, I'll put a link for that below. But if you can't, just hit like or subscribe, and you'll be doing your part to spread the good news of the nonviolent Jesus of the Gospels and the teachings of the church on militarism, war, and peace. All right, we'll go back to the interview now. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, where were we, Ellen? Do you know the spot where we left off?
Patrick, do you know where we left off?
Yeah. We were talking about how from the start, it's unregenerative society when a child is born. And so essentially how a child is reared and grown up, the society that child is in, is not one that is regenerated. It's not one.
Yes, it's not one. You can use your reason.
Yeah.
You're using your reason from perceptions that are given to you in your society, that are not that are the result of original sin or the fall.
Right.
And therefore, just using reason from nature doesn't work to save. Even if you're self-sufficient, even if you go all the way and you are absolutely as iron-willed as Pelagius or something,
right,
it's not going to save. You're going to, all right. So Jesus, so what's the difference between Stoicism at this point that we're talking about here, Stoicism and Christianity? The difference is adhering to a principle and adhering to a person. It's a big difference.
Yes.
Philosophy in the general sense is the mind looking at nature and coming to conclusions about where we come, where we go, how to live, etc. But it's a human activity. Jesus is not a philosopher. Jesus teaches the will of God or he's nothing. And the will of God, if it is the will of God now, that's what we say, and the will of God is not something you argue with. It's something you figure out how to implement. And so a philosophy is you have a philosophy, I have a philosophy. We could make a philosophy like Seneca or Aristotle or whatever the case may be. We could build up a philosophy too. You have to,
Yeah.
But it's humanly created. And when it comes to the end, you live the whole thing perfectly, there's no salvation in it. There is annihilation at the end.
Yeah.
And internally to human beings, we want to be. We don't want to be annihilated.
Correct.
We
It
want to
terrifies us.
continue to love. And
Yeah.
that's what Jesus comes in and offers. Now, here's the thing. How does he offer it? Clearly, he has to offer it in language. By his words and deeds, he shows us the model, the example. But by his resurrection, he's there to help us do it.
Mm.
A Stoic, a Hindu, a Buddhist, and so forth, when they are in the situation of having to do something that they are finding more and more difficult, don't want to do, and now I'm going to do, they don't say to Jesus, they don't pray to Jesus to help them, give them the grace to do it, be with them, show them how to do it. But a Christian has to. And if a Christian doesn't pray over what he's doing or she's doing before they do it, during the time they do it, after their time, it can be close to self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
That they're going to do this on their own, and it's not so. When Saint Teresa of Lisieux says, "All is grace," all is grace, all that's good in this world is a gift from God. God is in it, with it, through it, doing it with you.
Yeah.
So, all those things you see on the website and so forth and so on, a lot of prayer went into them before they started, during, and after them. As I still do today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is essential, because the prayer is what opens your will to the will of God, Jesus, so that you can do what he wants you to do. What you're doing is you're trying to unite with God, who's there, who's present. You're trying to be attentive and unite so that he literally is acting in you, and you're saying with your will, not yes, I can do it myself, but yes to your will in doing this. Like Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane. So the difference between Stoicism and Christianity at this point is the difference between self-sufficiency in life and in relying on trusting in the will of God as revealed by Jesus. And reaching out for it, not just,
I had a personal experience with that, because I had a medical scare last August, and was in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. So I had my wife bring my Bible and Epictetus's Discourses and some other books, but was steeped in those. And I had the perspective, there's potential for me to have to go through it's a kind of a notorious procedure, notorious for being painful, that this sort of thing. And I wasn't going to find out until the next morning if the doctors thought I should do it. So I spent that night, of course, in the hospital, and it was the closest I'd ever come to a Father, please take this cup from me if it's, but if it's your will, for someone else, they would look at what I was going through and probably be like, it wasn't that big of a deal. But for me, Patrick, this was the most that I'd ever been up against. And I do remember my world got very, very, very small in those moments when you're, in a hospital and you're facing something, the world gets that big. And even though my wife was there, I still felt, I was like, I'm me, what I mean? Like, she's right next to me. Yeah.
It's you.
And I do remember a distinct difference, because I was reasoning with it a bit. I was like trying to be like, okay, this is my body going through this. This isn't me. This is, if I get, this done to this part of my body, it's all these things. But it wasn't, it wasn't feeling that. There's a distinct difference between when I grabbed onto Christ and when I felt like I was holding on to something solid. There was a difference. Do you know what I mean? There was a distinct difference when I was spiritually holding on to something beyond me than when I was just using my brain to try to deconstruct what I was going through.
Absolutely. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So that to me was my personal experience of like, there's a big difference here. You know what I mean?
It is. I'd almost say it's an infinite difference.
Yeah.
Because what you are entering into when you go to Christ is you're entering into the reality of God, which is an infinite reality,
Mm.
who has before him how the universe works. He has all power. He knows what's good for you. He knows what's good for other people. And you're opening your will up to that
Yes.
versus having your will working at how do I control or restrain or whatever it is that I'm about, huh?
Yeah.
That's so self-sufficiency versus trusting in Jesus.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
will of God is revealed by Jesus, that is. That's the difference, a fundamental difference between Stoicism and the Gospels.
Right.
So when you look at the just war theory, which is Stoicism, it's not trusting in God. It's
Right.
not trusting in Jesus. It's I'll trust in you after I kill all the people and they lose their arms or whatever the case may be. That's not no.
So
No.
it's like substituting those principles for the prayer with the person and the, it's like a bunch of principles that you're supposed to follow.
That's right.
It's-
It's which you got it from unregenerated nature and so forth and so
Mhm.
on, and you've worked them out. And by the way, just because 10,000 people say something is true doesn't make
Right.
it true. It's truth.
Right.
Truth is the conformity of mind to reality. Conformity of mind to reality. And where we're dealing with what is the will of God for me and for others, huh? It really is of critical importance that I work at finding what is the truth for me in that, not just what 10,000 Frenchmen say.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's unfortunately, that's a problem because as I would say myself, I'm growing up in an Irish Catholic world in Boston, I became what I became because the whole world was nothing but Constantinian Christianity in spades.
Mm.
Absolutely. Robert Kennedy, they said one time, said don't get mad, get revenge, and against someone who was enemy. No, he didn't say that. That was normal saying in the Irish Catholic community in
Mm.
Boston. Hmm? Don't let anyone step on you, that sort of business there. This was Catholicism. Everyone went to mass on Sunday. Churches were packed. That sort of business there. And all this was validated by the whole paraphernalia of the church, the bishop, the hands, you name it.
Right.
And so what we got to be clear about is that at least I think you got to be clear about is this. Now you're Lutheran, and
If you don't mind me saying real quick,
uh,
I totally can. I said this to Ellen or to the class when we took the virtual retreat. First and foremost, I consider myself a Christ follower.
oh,
What I was raised in is the Lutheran Church. It's what
good.
I'm most comfortable and familiar with.
Yep, absolutely.
And a lot of it makes sense to me. So I attend a Lutheran church. So
That's right.
yeah.
All right. So I'm not that's another thing
Right.
altogether.
Right.
Yeah. I talk to Christians or people who want to be Christians or people who are Christians,
Right.
Baptists, and but you the problem is when you are nurtured from childhood in this is a second nature to you.
Yeah.
This is a second nature to you. It's like I started smoking cigarettes at 12. They were going to throw me off the Little League baseball team, and except I lied. And,
You really started at 12.
Really
yeah,
early.
It sounds like
yeah,
I think my grandfather started at around 12. Yeah.
yeah. Well, everyone in my house smoked. The house
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
everyone smoked cigars, pipes, everything else. But the thing is that at 32, when I just came to the conclusion this is not good for me,
Yeah.
this just is not good for me. I can feel things wrong,
Yeah.
Um, it really, how am I going to say this? It's not that the addiction couldn't be broken. It's not that I didn't have reason to break it. I liked it.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah.
And therein lay the issue, you know? And so we are, uh, we are, well, John McKenzie, the priest that I quote all the time, says, I can make the case, and I'll stand by it, that the United States of America has been the most violent country in the history of the world per capita.
Mm.
And, you know, we don't know much about the Indians and and so forth and so on, but we know a little now, a little more than we did. But we're brought up in the midst of violence, huh? But he says also, it didn't become violent on its own. The violence of Europe was brought over here by the Pilgrims, by this and that and the other thing. The American Indians knew nothing of the violence of Europe here in the Americas. It didn't exist that way. And the violence of Europe was terrible since Constantine. Just slaughter
Is it
after
in, is it in proportion to a civilization's, how do you call it, advancement or whatever? You know, do we all have the same evil? It's just that some, quote, do it better because we have better resources and things like that. Because like you kind of hinted at, you know, the natives, they had their own things going on, right?
Yeah, they have a bow and arrow.
Yeah. But we, you know, Europeans brought over, the machine killing machines, that sort of thing. That actually touches upon a question, if you don't mind, that I had prepped. You did make a very compelling point once in one of the podcasts about, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to say it's like for Jesus's a case for his part of it. I'm just going to use the word like authenticity or whatever, his legitimacy, by the fact that Tiberius is forgotten about, and Jesus, this man who died this shameful death, you know, on the cross,
As remembered.
Exactly. Now, what I'm curious though is, it does seem to me that whether good or bad with Constantine, the fact that he adopted the cross, um, can you argue that Christ's fame, a lot of it is due to his cross being carried on the backs of European warriors and violence and genocide? For better or worse, he was carried into these places, and he is now, you know, Jesus. Would Jesus be as popular if he weren't carried on the backs of warriors? You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly that's an important question. That's that can only be, that's unanswerable, but because it's because what it does, it's asked for talking about a hypothetical future versus the future that happened.
Yeah.
From a hypothetical past that didn't exist.
Correct.
But let's see if this makes sense under those circumstances. The gospel is clear. In fact, the entire Old Testament is clear. It's just that the gospel looks at it at a different angle. The gospel is clear. And this is a sentence I picked up from Dorothy Day. That the good deed will ultimately produce good results. The bad deed, which is always of the diabolical, cannot produce good results. So, what we're talking about here is Christianity as it stands today, which is about 2 billion people in the world. Christianity as it stands today would not exist if Constantine weren't there. Right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's true. It couldn't exist. I couldn't exist. You couldn't exist. All of history would be different.
Yeah.
Absolutely, positively, it would be utterly, utterly different. Would it be better? Would it be worse? I no idea. What we do know is evil means cannot be used to produce good ends. But what we also know is that God is stronger than evil, and that he can bring out of evil means what evil means cannot produce themselves.
Hmm.
So, I would say that in my own life, what I see here, and as it says right there in, New Testament, God is not mocked. God is not mocked. If you sow evil, you get evil. If you sow corn, you don't get wheat.
Mhm.
And this is a universal phenomena in the understanding of Christian religion, and also others like Buddhists and so forth. You can't reap what you don't sow, and what you do sow, you do reap. So, what would the world be like today if the church had stayed the course for the last 2,000 years, last 1,700 years, had stayed the course as it did in the first 3 centuries, teaching explicitly and living explicitly, and the community dedicated explicitly to making sure it happened that way, love of enemies and so forth and so on. Who knows,
Yeah.
But then again, um, there's no possibility that evil is going to conquer God. The Lamb will conquer. That's him, let us follow. So even if we don't see the immediate fruits, it's going to happen because God is almighty, and evil at best is the work of a creature.
Hmm.
So that's the only way to answer that question about a hypothetical past and a hypothetical present, But what is true from your question is, the churches don't know how to get out of this, even when they know what the truth is.
Yeah.
A priest by the name of Bill Daly, who was a major theologian in the New Testament at Boston College and Jesuit and so forth, and who worked closely with the bishops, told me about 25 years ago. He said, when I asked him, what's wrong with the bishops that they can't see the nonviolence of Jesus? And that was right there in the gospel. And he said, they see it, and we've informed them, meaning the theologians, scripture theologians, and we've informed them that Jesus is nonviolent. But he said, and by 1975, we've been sure they were informed that Jesus was nonviolent. And that was his teaching. And he said, but they are absolutely baffled what to do with it. Because if they ever teach it, they fear they're going to divide the church.
Okay, so we we have a long half-hour talk between each segment that we're taping, but we were just talking about Christ on the cross and in Gethsemane and imagining what he was about to go through in terms of the pain and the suffering and what he had to face. And so I think that I'm just, when you all were talking, I was reading through my Marcus Aurelius just to remind myself, like, what is Stoicism again? Because I taught this years ago. But it seems to me that one of maybe another difference here is that, can you imagine Christ trying to conquer that experience just by shoring up his mind, and trying to rationalize or reason his way, kind of like what you were saying, Patrick, about your personal experience.
Yeah.
But it seems like maybe when he knew he was doing it for humanity, but when you're suffering pain for others, I think that's a completely different experience than when you're just alone and you don't think that it matters or means anything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I think that's another
Absolutely.
difference between Stoicism and Christianity, because I've always been told, like, oh, if you're suffering or whatever, like, offer it up. And I never really knew,
I don't know what that means.
I never knew what that meant either. But it is a different experience if you actually believe that it matters.
There used to be a place out in Nebraska called Boys Town. And there was a famous movie with Spencer Tracy, called Boys Town. And he was Father Flanagan. And it was an actual place, an actual priest. Father, we used to, my mother and father used to send money to it all the time, little donations. But the motto was a little boy carrying another little boy, his little brother. And the thing under it said, he's not heavy, he's my brother.
Mm.
And that's the idea of the love. When the love is motivating it, that's different than when you're just enduring by will.
Yeah, and
May-
that's actually, oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry, Ellen, please. No, please continue.
Oh, I was just going to say real quick, that's actually at the end of Oedipus at Colonus, when Oedipus Rex dies. There's a scene in the play by Sophocles where he says that it's all been so difficult, but it was love that made it lighter. And it's
Hmm.
like, when you think about that, like I don't know, I love that part because it seems like even though that was a pagan play,
Yeah.
like they still kind of knew that if there's love involved, and that's the only way you can really reconcile, like, pick up your cross and follow me with, my burden is easy, or my yoke
Oh,
is
yeah.
easy, and my burden is light. Like, that's the only way you can reconcile those two things, right? Is like with that
Yeah.
love. And
And
so,
how does that love, I think myself, that love starts with loving the man in Gethsemane who does all this for you and does it freely. And you carry that with you. In
right, because
everything.
you can't do it unless someone did it for you
That's
first.
right. That's right.
Right.
Someone has to, yeah. And it's
Yeah.
that love in Gethsemane, if done right, I mean, if done like I'm thinking, which may not be, that's an experience. That's just not an idea or so forth. That's entering into Jesus making a terrible decision that probably none of us would make ourselves. To
Mhm.
die for humanity and this kind of death just because God somehow told me? Carl Stern, I don't think you know Carl Stern, but Carl Stern is a psychiatrist, was a psychiatrist, and he was a Hasidic rabbi in Poland way back in the teens and 20s. And then he left that Hasidic community, very, very different. He left the community and he went to get a philosophy degree in Germany. And he got the philosophy degree, and the university he was in was the same place where Martin Buber resided at the same time. And he and Buber became good friends, and they were both Hasidic and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So when the Nazi thing came along, he got out of Germany and went to England, and then he went from England to Canada. And a Jewish rabbi, and what he has is he has a job as a psychiatrist in Montreal or something like that. And he meets Dorothy Day. And Dorothy Day, herself, not her arguments, her life, her being what she was, her being, somehow touched him, not touched him, it got in there with it, like the word of God gets into the heart, sort of thing. And he became Catholic, all right? But here's the thing, he's in his book, which is a must read, I think, Pillar of Fire, autobiography of Carl Stern. In his book, he says, and this is why about Gethsemane and what we're doing, there is nothing purely rational that is strong enough to bind the heart of a human being. There is nothing purely rational that's strong enough to bind the heart of a human being. And therefore, it's irrational for Jesus to die on the cross for that. But he is loving the Father. But more, at least with that, he is loving humanity. This is the way for human beings like himself to be free of evil and death ultimately forever and be with God. He's loving. And, we all remember the Pascal quote about the heart has reasons which reason doesn't know. Yes.
that's
more
like
than
the
common.
only thing I remember from college. Is that
What's
quote
that?
from Pascal.
Oh,
Yeah, I love that.
It's correct.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just say all these things because you're right, Ellen, that Father Flanagan's symbol was right. He's my brother. He's not heavy.
Mhm.
add love to the, and yeah.
May I do think of Socrates when I do think of also someone, going to their death willingly. Now Socrates, he felt it was the right thing, right? Like they had, whether or not he agreed with, what was it, Miletus and whoever that condemned him more or less or brought the charges, the jury voted. He said, I will do that. I will take the poison. And he did it with, essentially, from what I gather, from Plato and all that, with essentially with total peace and surrender, because he was doing the right thing. And his last words were essentially, he said to his friend, "Oh, don't forget we owe," and I think it was a god, a chicken. They say a cock.
Asclepius, yeah.
Yeah. We owe him a chicken. And so it was like this pious thing. Like the moment he's about to die, he's paralyzed up to here. You know what I mean? He's like, oh, don't forget. So it's like this, and you can argue that was done for love as well, I think, in humanity, because he could have escaped. They easily could have gotten him out. But he thought, it's just not the right thing. Reason does not tell me to escape. Like reason tells me that I got to do this. And he was so beholden to reason, because reason was a slice of God given to us. It's that one piece of God that he has given us, that free will, that reason. So that, I've heard, I remember I was in church once and a pastor, said like, philosophy will, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he essentially kind of like wrote Socrates off as like, he committed suicide in a cell, and I was like, well, there's more to it than that. Yeah, he did, but, but anyway, there's always been a very interesting parallel with Socrates, who would also speak of like a demon in him, in the sense of like, I think a spirit, like, you know what I mean? Like almost like there's these interesting parallels between Jesus and Socrates, where I don't know if it's fair to say Socrates is almost the secular Jesus, or how you want to put it, or if Jesus is the divine, like if Socrates were divine. I don't know. It's all those probably sound blasphemous and wrong. I'm sorry. But it's just very interesting thing I've noticed with him too.
And I think you could only say, like your pastor said, that he committed suicide in a jail. You could only say that if you believe that nonviolence is the same thing as suicide.
Interesting.
Socrates was just totally nonviolent. He was going to do whatever the law told him to do. And they put him to death. And even though he could have escaped and they could have like bribed his way out, he chose not to. But a lot of my students would say that. They've been, Miss Finnigan, nonviolence is just suicide. They think it's the same thing. But he made that choice and let the chips fall where they were going to fall. But that doesn't mean that he was choosing death.
Well, Roger Laporte, on November 9, 1965, stood outside the United Nations building and immolated himself, burned himself to death. And Dan Berrigan, who heard his confession that afternoon, he died just a little while later, but he was conscious. Roger said that he wasn't trying to kill himself. He was trying to raise consciousness about the misery that the United States government was pouring onto the Vietnamese people. And Dan said, that it was one of the most profound confessions he ever heard. Okay. But Socrates is not Jeffrey Epstein. There's a different world there. Socrates is doing something because this is his duty to the polis, to the state, to the nation, to the Athens. In other words, these are the rules, these are the laws. And you can't have a human society if people are going to break the laws and not follow them. And therefore, he follows the law. He's not breaking it. He's not. He does what he's supposed to do. Okay, so it's yes. Socrates saw the state, or the city, if you will, city-state, as essential to having human life. Human life requires order, and this was the order that was necessary to. And he wasn't going to break it in order to have bad things happen because of disorder. At any rate, no problem with Socrates. That's the question for all of us is, you see, the question for all of us is, no person lives without faith. Every human being lives by faith. The atheist lives by faith. A Christian does, the Buddhist does, the Hindu does, the agnostic does. By faith, I mean that they can't prove the premises from whence they're building everything. They can't prove it. First premises are beyond proof by their definition. They are taken for granted. They are self-evident. But they're only self-evident to the person who uses them. Now, another person may see them as self-evident and use them, but each individual has to start his thinking with self-evident first premises that cannot be logically proved, but are truth to them. And then, but that position, premises are faith. They are not proved. Every human being lives by faith. And anyone that says they don't live by faith just hasn't gone back far enough. And so, and so the man who says I'm an atheist, that's reasonable. No, it isn't reasonable. It's reasonable after you make the faith commitment that there's no God. But you can't prove there's no God. That's impossible. So everyone lives by faith. Socrates lived by faith. Jesus lived by faith. We live by faith. But one of the important things in life, which is not placed out there very clearly by the churches, by the religions, or by education, is that we live by faith. What you're seeing, what you're doing, what you're choosing is right and wrong, starts from a faith position. This is, if people could see that, if people could see that, there'd be less finger waving. Less finger waving, less destruction, maybe.
Yeah.
And if I could see it, myself, I'd know that what I'm doing is I'm working out something that appears to me to be a self-evident truth, not a rationally arrived at truth. I could be wrong, and therefore, in the structure of the human mind, once it becomes clear you're wrong, you reject something.
Correct.
So if you grow up being told the earth is flat, and then someone comes along in 254 BC and just shows it can't be flat, well, yeah, sure you change, because your premise is all wrong.
Yeah.
So we are all people of faith. There is no one that isn't. And I'm not sure that it's ever possible under any sets of circumstances to call into question someone else's faith, because you're not that unique person. And if he says, this is how I see the truth uniquely, as far as a premise, as far as his faith, that's controlling, that's definitive. What you can do is you can question the logical, reasonable application of it, development of it.
Yeah.
But not what his faith is.
So if you don't mind, we take something as common as death, right? And Epictetus would say, because death is so natural, it's so common, and death needs to happen for the new to be born, that sort of thing. And he has a quote, if you don't mind me reading.
Go ahead.
He said, it is not the things themselves that disturb people, but their judgments about those things. Death, for instance, is nothing terrible, or else it would have appeared so to Socrates too. But the terror lies in our judgment about death, that death is terrible. Now, as Christians, we believe death is a repercussion of sin, and it's an evil, essentially. so I'm just curious to know how, because we all experience death. Like, so for him and Epictetus in his mind, and I suppose the Stoics, if it's natural, it can't be bad. So because there was not, I guess, that original sin in Stoicism, as far as I know.
No, that's
So
right. You're right. Yeah.
right, that was how, and I suppose that would also go back to that first premises of reason is a piece from God, and or perhaps that's what the first premises is. I'm not sure, but he did. I will say as an aside, Epictetus, he was very religious. He was a very religious man, like talking about how his devotion to the gods, the household gods, and this and that, and Zeus. You know, what I mean, these things, and he did take as a given truth that God exists and that he knows every hair on my head. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy how similar some of the, beliefs are. But death particular has always struck me as one of those clear distinctions between Christianity and at least the discourses of Epictetus, where he's seeing death as it's so natural that it can't be bad. Like that. So it's our judgment that this is bad. Whereas Christians, we see death. I've seen death, I would argue, unnatural death in person, and there was nothing beautiful about it. And but anyway, I just curious to know what you think about that idea of how we view death as a byproduct of sin and therefore an evil, but then they see it as, or at least he did, it seems, as just this, it's natural, it happens, why be afraid of it?
The Christian.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ellen, you're muted.
I would add just one thing is like Socrates even went so far as to say this is going to be great. Like I think he's like, I can't wait to get to heaven and be with, because he believed that the gods were benevolent and good, and he's like, I don't know what all you people have a problem with. I can't wait to get there. So I don't know. I just wanted to add that. It just takes it one step further, right?
No, I think that's a faith, and that's fine. That's fine. I mean, there are people that look at the unknown of what happens after the last breath, and they say, I don't care what happens. You know, there are people that say it's terrible. It's, blah, blah, blah. There are people that say it's pie in the sky after you die, kind of thing too. The fact of the matter is, any sane person knows he hasn't got the slightest idea of what happens after death. He's making up a story. That's fine, maybe you make it up from your first premise and build your reasons on right up, huh? That's fine. You're accepting what you're saying about death on a faith. It's pure faith. There's nothing there to just justify it. So when Socrates says what he says, can't deny it. That's what he believes. But if we say that Jesus rose from the dead and he's there to take us into heaven when we die, we're one of his baptized, that also is a faith. That's a faith. They can't prove that. Now, it just thinking about it, that just for example, now you being a Lutheran now, Patrick, this will go against the grain. Right? Being a Lutheran, the gospel seems to say, New Testament seems to say that works are intrinsic to what happens after death, the works on earth that you do. It's not those who say, Lord, Lord, but those who do the will of my Father in heaven. And we could go on, huh?
Right.
Now, my understanding of Luther is the works are irrelevant. What is relevant is that Jesus saves you.
Mm-hmm. That's my understanding as well.
Yeah, Jesus saves you. And I think there's real problems there and all that, but that's not what we're, the thing is, the basic question is what I do here in any way related to what I am after. That's all. Is it a, but there's no answer to that.
Right.
There is a faith. There is a faith.
Yeah.
That what I do here is determinative. For example, Jesus says, if you're hungry, give me, thirsty, give him a drink. Whatever you do to the least, you do to me. If you don't do it, that also has consequences in eternity. He says there's something that goes on, you know. We all know that in the history of religion, because people don't know what goes on after the last breath, that makes them putty in the hands of those who present themselves as knowing what happens and therefore controlling them.
Right. Right.
And so, and so, but by the way, this reflects back a little bit on Stoicism and Christianity. The panoply of restraints, at least I would say Catholic Church now, because Luther was going to confession, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 times a day, confessing his sins because he couldn't get it. He couldn't stop sinning. Now, what was he talking about? He was talking about the whole laundry list of sins that the Catholic Church put there that was serious. And he was trying to not do them. And in the process of not doing them, he was doing it in one or another. Anyway, and that's part of how he came to the point that it can't be that the works make a difference. God has to save you, period. Because you can't stop sinning. But there goes the self-sufficiency again. You can't do it by yourself. God has to save you. But when we are confronted with death, when we are confronted with our own death, not the death of anyone else, not even of a loved one, it's our own death that raises, no doubt about it. Any doctor will tell you, the minute you say to a man or a woman, you've got terminal cancer in the office and they hear it for the first time, it is traumatic. Now, they may hold their things together and everything else, but no. So the question becomes for all of us, is there a relationship between acts in time and destination in eternity? Does that exist? Or is it just that if in time I accept Jesus as my Lord, God, and Savior, he will save me in eternity, regardless of what the acts are? Or is it possible that just Jesus or no Jesus, everyone's saved? Or no one is saved.
Right.
We're just all annihilated. These are the options. And the reason I choose to be a Christian is because in my heart of hearts, that is the heart that knows things that the mind doesn't know, that kind of heart. In my heart of hearts, I just don't think that I or anyone else in their heart of hearts wants to be annihilated forever. I know you can be in such a state of suffering that you'd want that, but no, on the normal, I don't think anyone, and this is even more serious, in my heart of hearts, I don't think anyone wants someone they love deeply to be annihilated forever.
Correct.
The Jewish rabbi Abraham Heschel, in one of his books on religious education, writes what am I going a primary question of religious education is not what happens to me after death, but what happens to those that I love that go before me. What will happen to those who I have loved, who I leave behind? It's the love that's the issue. We can hear 10,000 people die in an avalanche in India. It makes no difference. Let someone you love die in that avalanche, and everything changes.
Yeah.
So my my intuitive, which I base faith on, my faith on, is that No person really wants himself or herself and their loved ones. And then we could go on out from that. Their friends, to really be annihilated forever. And Jesus comes and he says, here's a way to get around that. Here's a way. Here's a way to eternal communion with God, which means God is I am, what is. Here is the way to eternal communion with what is, to non-annihilation. And God, in his love, sent Jesus to show us that way. And he paid a terrible price in order to show us that this really is the way. But anyway, that doesn't mean Socrates has to accept that or anyone has to accept that. That's how I see it.
Right.
And that comes out of that unique thing, that's you, me. But that's what I want, and that's what so my hope, when I say, as we say in the Mass, every Byzantine Mass, every time we say it, is glory to you, Christ God, our only hope. Glory to you, our only hope. There's no hope anyplace else. There's no hope. This is the dynamic. He just laid it out there to bring us to eternal oneness with I am. A faith. I don't want to fight people over it. I don't want to kill people over it. No.
Right. I had that thought when I was in the car at one point is philosophy can't forgive sins. It just kind of popped in my head at one point. And to me, that was also one of the massive differences between philosophy and Jesus Christ. And it does take that leap of faith. With Christ, I've wrestled with it more often, than not, to put it hyperbolically. And that's why it's been not just comforting. Everyone loves comfort, but I want truth more than comfort. And so reading All Things Flee helped with that. It helped me to see, it was the nonviolence was a personal route to Jesus too. Whereas, it was what kind of cut through a lot. And because one of the things that's mind numbing to me is when people argue different religious sects and all this stuff, you know what I mean? And it's like, wow, you know what I mean? Like, so I try to think about just the face of Jesus Christ, just his face, you know what I mean? Like, that's what it's about to me. And there are days when I'm like, Patrick, this Christianity stuff, this is getting into the way of being more intellectual or being more philosophical. It's like, but it ultimately comes down to that Pascal's wager as well for me, which is like, look, I can argue this with myself every day, and I have often. I made a decision. I'm sticking with this decision. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like I have to every now and then beat back that 9 thing, And someone can argue, hey man, that's a sign this is not kosher, as it were, but that's what I'm talking about. It'll pop up again. So it's endless. And that's why I have chosen Jesus. And I think a lot of people wrestle with this, and even people with like that were in my position politically with, being involved, they want things to be right. They feel like it's wrong and they want it right. And they don't, they're going about it their human ways, and they're going about it with supporting different political causes and this and that. And I'm still find myself, like subject to being really tempted to do that. And it might actually do it. But ultimately, yeah, it's that universal love. And that has made the difference for me.
You see, Patrick, Pascal's wager is Las Vegas religion. It's your odds, This is what he put us out to. These are your odds. This, and therefore you look at, oh, that's pretty good. When you love someone, you don't stop loving them.
Right.
You can force yourself not to love them, but you don't stop loving them. That movie that we're talking about, which is, we don't need the movie. It's in there in the Gospels. Jesus in Gethsemane and what he's doing there at that moment, a moment that actually exists.
Yeah.
Is, if you can be with Jesus in that moment and just empathize, sympathize with what he's going through. Sympathetic imagination, which we have, you'll love him
Hmm.
because he doesn't know any more than you and I know at this moment. He doesn't know if he's going to rise from the dead or not.
Hmm.
He's living in a world where God is absent. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But he's still going forward with what he believes in faith is God's plan for him and needed for humanity.
Hmm.
It's kind of like Saint Teresa Lisieux, who's Saint Teresa Lisieux, who Thomas Merton refers to as one of the greatest saints of the church, and everyone kind of thinks she's just a holy doll. But when you read her story of the soul, you see she's a serious Christ-like lover. Saint Teresa Lisieux, when she is ill, tuberculosis,
Hmm.
she can't move. She can't move without choking, suffocating because the lungs gone. This is back 1897. Terrible, terrible disease. In fact, in 1897, they were treating tuberculosis with milk and leeches. That's what that's what she endured. So her whole life was, and she says it in the book, she has wanted to do nothing but to love as Jesus loved, the new commandment. And she worked at it. She did it. She tried hard. But on the night of Holy Thursday, Good Friday, the superior of the Carmelites sent her to bed because she felt she needed a rest and to get up in the morning and just don't stay through the night, as we all used to do that those days in the Catholic Church, Holy Thursday through Good Friday. So she goes to bed, and she's in bed and she's sleeping, and she coughs up blood.
Hmm.
And she's writing this in her book. She coughs up blood. She knew exactly what it was, and she was happy
Hmm.
because she knew that what she spent her whole life trying to achieve, going to heaven, it was going to happen soon. That's what she writes in the book. And that is between Holy Thursday and Good Friday. And she doesn't say a word to the Reverend Mother. She gets up, does the rest of her work. She's fine. And on Monday the Monday after that, she writes, she's fallen into a state so terrible that she can't mention it to anyone because she knows it's contagious. A state of certainty that she and everyone else was going to be annihilated.
Yeah.
It's a state we call angst now.
Mm.
She fell into that. And she thinks about how to deal with it and so forth and so on. Because now there is no God. There is no God who is so close to her is gone. Just like Jesus, my God, why have you forsaken me? But she says in the book, she says, and now just to give you a date on this happened April 6th, 1897. She died September 30th, 1897. So it's about 6 months in here.
Yeah.
She says in the book that she was keeping notes. She says, however, even though I can't feel God, I don't know God, even though it's all meaningless and nothing, I am going to still continue to love as Christ loved. And I still am going to continue to go to God with the certainty that he loves me.
Hmm.
Now that's what Jesus did in Gethsemane. That's strong stuff, huh? That's strong. And that's what we're dealing with, huh? But it's the stuff of love, not of a wager.
Yeah.
You work at loving God. You work, or you get the grace, or you do what you have to love Jesus, to love God through Jesus, and then, love.
Yeah.
And the wager about, is this going to get me to heaven? Is that going to get me to heaven? Well, we'll put that in Las Vegas. I'm not.
Well, I have leaned into that before, where I was like, Patrick, stop. We took the wager, maybe not in those
Yeah,
words, but
yeah.
so it has gotten me through. I know even Pascal was a little like annoyed, I think, that was all people took away from him. But anyway, but no, I've read, I will just say, there's one thing that I love about the Catholic tradition. I've read a handful of I right here, Revelations of Divine Love, Julian of Norwich,
Oh,
Teresa of Lisieux, Augustine. I love the intellectual tradition in the Catholic Church, and even reading Julian of Norwich. It's one of those things where you can't explain it, but I do remember reading of her experience of illness, near death, and everything. Feeling after I read, it's all I can say is the Holy Spirit. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just felt like I was like, wow, and it traveled through a word from so long ago. You know what I mean? And it's just an amazing thing. So,
have you looked into the Eucharist, Patrick?
I have heard of it, Ellen. No, the end every morning and talk about Stoicism, I think, and philosophy working in, because I think this was written, in a time where that was very popular as well. As every morning I read from the Imitation of Christ, and
Oh,
there's
yeah.
very much a lot of, I think, reason in there and stuff like that. And I'm not sure your opinion on this, Father McCarthy, but I love this book.
Yeah, it's Stoicism. It's Stoicism.
Yeah, maybe that's part of the reason I love it so
That's
much.
right.
I wonder, I was going to ask you guys, because I've noticed this too. I know people of different ages right now who are really into Stoicism, and I've just heard it come up a lot lately. And I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
like, why now, and why are they attracted to that as opposed to, say, Christianity? Or any thoughts on that? Like, why is it seeing a resurgence in popularity?
So I do have an opinion, as I do think there's something very attractive about the reason, rationality, things like that, because we live in a very emotional, I guess you could argue, emotional time, that sort of thing. And that self-sufficiency that Father McCarthy had mentioned is very, attractive, especially, I think, perhaps maybe more so to men as well. There's very much, I've noticed, kind of like a
Yeah.
masculine twist on this.
Yeah, like
Where
there's a lack of masculinity or something, and it seems very masculine.
And you'll see illustrations of some of the Stoics, and they're just like ripped and stuff. I'm like, I don't know where that came from, but I will say that Stoicism is, when anything becomes popular, it starts to become commodified, things like that. And then before you know it, like I mentioned early on, Father McCarthy, one of the things that helped, for better or worse, if this is on me, legitimize him in my mind, was the fact that he was not strictly selling materials. Like, I can't judge, because I don't know what I would do in the position, okay, if I wrote a book and whatever. But I remember once hearing a pastor on the radio talking about, he was saying, we have these ways of how you can pray properly, or something like that. If you just got to buy this book, and in it are, and I'm thinking to myself, why aren't you giving it away for free? This is like a spiritual thing. You're talking about prayer. And that was the thing about like Epictetus and stuff. Like, he didn't even write anything. This was all written by Arian, his student. Like Socrates, they didn't sell books. They were doing it for, I think, humanity. And Christ, don't get me started. Like, he didn't write anything down. Like, he was just loving humanity and loving God, and the apostles. But then there's something when it becomes commodified, to me, that has always, and again, I can't judge because I don't know what I would do if I wrote a book and it was like, but so when I do see something like Christian materials being sold, and I understand the system we live in, and I get that. And you need to, I paid to see a speaker. You've probably heard of him, on nonviolence. I paid a convent, so to upkeep, I get it. But with the Stoicism too, people are selling trinkets and things, about Stoicism. And I'm like, I can't see Socrates or Epictetus ever being like, yeah, you should buy this necklace that says, or this ring. And it's like, ugh, you know what I mean? So anyway, when you're into something, which doesn't happen very often that I'm into something before it becomes hot. I was into this, and suddenly it's kind of become more pop culture, and so when you're into something that then becomes pop, when you mention to someone you're into it, their initial reaction is, oh, you're following the bandwagon. And I suppose as a true Stoic, you should not care about that, but it's just one of those things that I don't know, that was a long answer, but
No one has made more money for more people than the poor Jesus. Made a fortune for all kinds of people over 2,000 years. Catholic Church, Lutheran Church, Methodist Church, the members of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
No, and that makes that everything you're saying, I agree with. Makes no sense whatsoever. If it's real, that stuff is irrelevant. What the important thing is to get people to love Jesus and know what he said. But in a world where basically savage capitalism rules, whether you're in China or here, the fact of the matter is, if you don't monetize it, you don't get it out,
I wouldn't afford this computer. There are realities like that, right? I wouldn't be able to talk to you if, you know what I mean? These sorts of things. So that's why, again, I can't judge. I'm like,
Well, there's a question here. See, there's a question here. Emily Dickinson, who's one of my favorite poets, I love Emily Dickinson. Probably because she says things short and precise, unlike me. And anyway, we all know the little vignette, I'm nobody, who are you? I'm nobody too. For the writings, I'm nobody, who are you? I'm nobody too. Emily Dickinson ordered in her will that all her writings be destroyed. We would have nothing of Emily Dickinson if the guy who was the executor of her will just hid them, kept them, and then published them after all the business with the Jesus wrote nothing. Nothing, nothing at all. And therefore, I mean, put it this way, to the point that we have to act against our own truth to spread our own truth, that is universally unacceptable. That's the lack of integrity, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're a Christian and you've got a good news that's not yours, but God that gave you to give, and you got it, and you're Reverend Ike. Reverend Ike? Remember Reverend Ike in Chicago? Oh, no. He was black. Oh, he was good. He was good. He was a black minister that he was diamonds and everything else, Rolls Royces, and he didn't pull any punches, Yeah. If God is going to love you if you give me another diamond, It was not like your basic, Southern Baptist doing something on a revival tent. No, this was right out there, and he was like Don King, except he's in religion.
Right.
And so anyway, Jesus comes along, freely gives, and not only freely gives, but pays a terrific price to give to you. And now you're hustling a buck off it? That's no good. I've never taken a collection up at my mass where I was in control of things. Never. I've never taken a dime to say a mass in 40 plus years. It's just not right. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the gospel.
Now, I would say, if you don't mind, your message would be, in the gospel of nonviolence, it would be just as legitimate if you did charge. Do you know what I mean? If it was, I wouldn't be like, oh, Father McCarthy, I'm, I get it. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, when I saw that you weren't selling, I was like, oh, that's different. You know what I mean? Like, this is very interesting. So
I don't take a buck. I don't take money for it, not for you finding out or anything else. I don't take money for it because my judgment is it is not God's will that I take a buck for this as revealed by Jesus. I make money other ways, but
Yeah.
not that.
Okay.
And as
Yeah.
long as we're on the topic of money, can I just say that we stopped our conversation twice because I didn't want to pay for Zoom, but I didn't want to stop it a third time, so I paid for it, but I didn't really pay for it. Patrick, thank you for your donation.
Hey.
Antonio, Arthur, Nancy, and Janine, thank you if you're listening,
that's
because you helped
awesome.
me to buy Zoom today. So thank you for that. Yeah.
You mean we got more time?
Oh yeah, we can stay here all day.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. That's
Well,
what I like. A real
we
gathering.
could. Yeah, we
Right.
could, but I told my wife I'd be wrapping up soon, so I gotta.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, I have one final question. Do you have any good ideas for the title of this episode? What should I call it? I was
With
thinking,
something very clickbaity.
yeah, like
Yeah,
Stoicism and
something like
Christianity.
that.
I don't know if that's going to do it. So I need you guys to help me come up with something creative.
What'll get people's, what's got pizzazz?
How about the master of my domain?
Oh,
Yeah, master of my domain.
hey.
Master of my domain.
Okay,
That's a good one.
I might have to do
People-
that.
Yeah, because everyone is looking at your programs. They'll know what that is from. Oh, besides, we explain it.
They'll be like, what? They're talking about what? Okay, I'm
Yeah.
clicking on this. Yeah, so I think that should be it. Well, thank you so much for
you.
your time, Charlie, and Patrick. Thanks for co-hosting with me and helping me to produce another episode where I didn't have to do a lot of prep work. So I appreciate that.
This has been
Well,
great. I
it's
appreciate
nice to see you again, Ella. By the way, what's this thing with you now?
Wait, I know what you're going to ask me. I think I should turn off the recording.
Oh, I think I might know too.
Should we turn off the recording?
What difference does it make? You could cut it out. If you
Okay,
want.
I'll edit it later. Yeah.
So
All right, everybody, here at the end, we're talking about my idea of a movie that I wanted to make, and I thought that Patrick, being an actor, would be perfectly suited for the lead role. And Father McCarthy then came along and tried to wrest creative control and came up with his own movie that he thought Patrick should be in. So you can vote in the comments as to whose movie you think Patrick should be in. Also, if you are a movie producer or would like to fund this project or happen to be best friends with Mel Gibson, feel free to get in touch.
you got as I think, you've got the best Jesus you could ever have right here in film.
I think
I
really, the Ben Salmon thing, like the Jesus thing has been on your mind. Ben Salmon, this has been on my mind for years. And like, I feel like I'm supposed to do something like for the Ben Salmon thing, but I mean, Jesus is good too. Gethsemane is good too.
Yeah.
I like your idea, Charlie. I really do.
When
We're just gonna have to fight over him.
Oh golly.
All right. Well, it was great talking to you
Okay.
guys.
Thank you, Patrick, for
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
everything.
Maybe we'll do it again. Maybe we'll have a sequel.
Yeah, that'd be
Maybe
fun.
we'll have a sequel.
I'll let you know when the
Okay.
podcast is up.
Thank you.
Okay.
That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.